Welcome. We are so happy to have you back on the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I'm Katherine Peterson here with my co host, Michael Regan. And I was listening to an older episode of our podcast on productivity hacks. I think it was 8 or 9. And one of the things we brought up was email. And we said, oh my gosh, we need to have a whole episode just on email tips, tricks, some things to do because it can run our entire life some days. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So stay tuned. First, I want to welcome in Michael. Thanks for being here.
Always happy to be with you, Catherine, and I am glad that you did that. I think there are probably two things that really resonate with me about you setting it up this way. One is I hope our audience sees the wisdom in what you did, which is there are times where going back and looking at an archived episode can be really helpful because we've covered gosh, some really great topics in our first 100 episodes. And I hope that our audience is excited to go back and revisit because most of those are evergreen. They don't stand caught in a moment in time. They're applicable last year, this year, and next year. So I'm glad you were doing that. The other is, yeah, we do sometimes touch on topics that cross over with other topics, and we realize that probably does deserve a revisit. So good work farming this one out of the archives, and I'm excited to spend time on it with you.
All right. So let's touch on one of my least and most favorite topics all at once, email.
Dive right in, Catherine.
All right. So for me, one of the things that I really think about is, boy, I really need to time block email. And I'm not the best at that, at turning it off and then back on later. So let's talk about how people can kind of strive to get there and what are some good check-in times from the coach's perspective.
Well, I'll tell you how I learned to really utilize this practice personally, and I hope that that then becomes something that some of you could practice if you're inspired by it. I realized that one of the things that I do every day, all day on these coaching calls is I'm highly focused with the person that I'm spending time with, and one of the commitments that I make in doing that is to not be distracted by my email, which means I have to turn Outlook off. So not just ignore it in my tray or turn notifications off, don't even open the app. So once I decided that that was the level of commitment I wanted to have to be totally present with my coaching clients, that meant I had to really think through what's my purpose of email. And therefore, I can't make it a tool of urgency, or I'm regularly going to be disappointing people. And then I'm going to be feeling anxious about, oh my gosh, who's stressed out that I didn't read their email and get back to them in 30 minutes or less. So I think number one is I had to create a scenario in which email could no longer be my tool of urgency. And that was really relieving for me, Catherine, because once I decided to do that, and by the way, we're talking about a decision I made 12 years ago. So I've had, over a decade practicing this. So I've proven that it's possible. So I challenge any of you out there who tell me, "Oh no, I could never do that. I could never turn email into a casual communication tool. It doesn't work in my culture. It doesn't work within our company." I'll challenge that to say, yeah, I've proven that it's possible. You just have to create the boundary of it where you're committed to it. And then you have to create an alternate plan for, well, then what does happen to urgent communication and how do I handle it? So back to your time block. I create in my coaching calls regular breaks between my calls in which I have now the opportunity to handle urgency. So not only can I load Outlook up to 4 times during the course of my day to see if an email is in there that I need to. But that's also where I check my urgent tool. Like today, we have Microsoft Teams, which is like a common inter-office communication tool. Some of you may be using different products, but you understand the tool. I've made it clear to my team, hey, if there's urgency or anything you need to get hold of me on, use that because I'm more likely to respond quickly to that. And then with my clients, I think you would attest to this. I make it clear to them that please send me a text message because then I'll see that on that break. And if it's urgent, I can get back to you. So time blocking isn't really where I started. It's where I ended because I made a decision at the beginning to not make email a tool of urgency. And I think that's what forced the change.
Got it. That's a great tip because it does get so hard. Someone's like, hey, I emailed you 10 minutes ago. You didn't respond. What's going on? And then you're like, you get wrapped back in. So I think that like honestly, if someone really needed me, they could get a hold of Hannah right outside my office and she could just come in. So I think we forget that we have so many tools in front of us. We don't need all of them to be urgent. We can name one of them is the urgent tool. So I think that's a great tip, and I might attempt that again.
Yeah, and
Hold
play
me
around with
accountable.
that, Catherine, just like I hope our audience will. You may find out that text isn't the best tool of urgency. Maybe there's a different way to do it. Maybe you're old school and you say, if it's urgent, call me, pick up the phone and call me. Or in an office environment, hey, if it's urgent, don't message me. Walk down the hallway and see if I'm available. Like you'll figure it
Mhm.
out. But the point is, as long as we make email our tool of urgency, or we at least respond to it, we're training people to say, well, that's a good way to get a hold of me urgently. Where if we let them know it's not, maybe we start rerouting the urgency to a preferred method, and then the time block for email really is effective.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So I've also heard about this three bucket system that relates to some other podcasts we've done in different ways of is it something that I can, take now and respond to in less than 20 seconds? Do I need to take action right away? Can I wait on this and look at it later, like tomorrow? Or is it something that's, let's say, something to read, like a guideline update, and I can do that during a guideline time block? So I really like that as a good system for saying, hey, here's three different buckets, and I'm going to put those buckets either in flags or you can like color the emails differently. So that's something that I think can be effective for people who get a whole lot of emails, especially emails of different urgency.
Yeah, that's a great system that you're designing because it's simple and everybody can understand it. It doesn't require a lot of overthinking, and so if you set that guardrail, you said 30 seconds, maybe it's a minute, maybe it's 2 minutes, but the idea is if that first bucket is something I can handle in that time frame. So for me, it's 2 minutes or less. If I can handle it in 2 minutes or less, getting it out of my inbox quickly during that time that I'm opening email is really effective. It keeps things from piling up. But to your point, when you look at that second bucket, sometimes these are things that I maybe need to get to by the end of the day or the end of the week. So, in a sense, they're still important. They're just not urgent. And so that's the first separation between the first two buckets is they're both important, but one's urgent, one's not as urgent. So that delineation helps. That third bucket that you described about, and don't let me imply that learning guidelines is not also important, but its level of importance compared to many of the things that do show up in your typical inbox is probably measurably lower. And yet at some point, it's really critical that that's part of your learning time. So I love the way that you laid that out. I think our audience can figure that out based on the world they live in. If you're in the housing industry, you probably resonated with what Catherine just said. But if you're out there in a different business model, think through that. Certain things need to be done in 2 minutes or less. Certain things need to be done later. They just need to have a time in your calendar. And then the third things either get scheduled down the road or consider this. Maybe they just get delegated. Maybe that's the email that you forward to someone else on your team to say, "Hey, I'm going to ask you to take a look at this and respond accordingly." And you come up with a method for delegation for that category. By the way, I won't define the fourth bucket. You gave three. I like three, but don't forget, delete or the junk folder, really effective in email. I try to train my email because now AI is baked into most of our email platforms that, hey,
Hmm.
these are the types of emails that you can just put in my junk folder. And I, once a week, just so everybody knows, I'll scan through that in case something slipped through the cracks. I'm not going to delete something that is important. But 9 times out of 10, AI is learning, maybe more than nine, like 99 times out of 100, it's putting stuff in my clutter folder or my junk
Hmm.
folder that I don't really need to see in that first three bucket exercise. So leave that for the it's like once a week. You take your trash out to the curb at home. Once a week,
Yeah.
maybe check your email inbox junk folder to see if there's any trash in there.
Yeah, that's the truth. Holy cow. And I do also think that there's this maybe like stigma that we have in our brain of like if I leave it in my email, I'll do it. But I think about how many times I've looked at the same email. And it might be that it's been in there and I look at it and I'm like, oh, I'll do that later. Oh, I'll do that later. And all of a sudden you've spent 5 seconds, but you've looked at it 42 times. You could have done it three times over. So it's sometimes just looking at it, you have to remember that that's still energy that you're spending. So that's why that three bucket method can be so helpful.
Okay, you just unlocked another hack that might work for that third bucket, and it's one
Hmm.
that I use. You know, you and I will have coaching calls on a regular routine, sometimes every 2 weeks, sometimes once a month. But when we have a coaching call, there are many things over the course of that gap that we may need to review. Well, when I get notifications from our portal that that's something that we need to review, I don't leave it in my inbox so that I read it 42 times, reminding myself each time, oh, yeah,
Hmm.
Catherine and I will talk about that next Thursday. Oh, yeah, Catherine and I will talk about that next Thursday. That's a waste of energy. You're totally right
Hmm.
about that. So I create in my inbox a subfolder under my clients subfolder, a folder called Catherine Peterson. I slide that email in there, and then that's part of my prep for our meeting. You know, if I've got regularly scheduled meetings, and all of you out there do, you have meetings with people, whether they're teammates or partners or clients, if those things didn't fit that 2 minutes or less urgent category, consider sliding them into a folder that you know exactly where to find it, but your brain isn't looking at it in the big inbox folder where you've now got 10, 20, 30, 50, 80, how many ever emails. I mean, my anxiety goes up just talking about it, Catherine.
I know there's a lot of anxiety around email. That's why I said it was my least and favorite topic. All right. So here's an idea that I just got as I was doing some research for this episode, but I haven't practiced this enough, but I think it's a great idea. So I want to make sure to share it. It's using subject lines as mini commitments. Okay. I'm going to change up the word slightly here. So, for example, appraisal update action needed today, or something like, hey, mortgage coach worksheet to John Smith, due by Tuesday. Something like that, so that you're using those subject lines, especially with your team, to get something done, but it can be to a client as well. And question for you, 20 seconds. Well, then if I'm sending that to you, you might go, oh, I know I can deal with this in less than 2 minutes. I'm going to answer right away. So it helps other people also stream their email. And I think the more we do that, the more people do it back to us. So that's something I'm going to implement right away because I loved that idea.
So I'm going to dovetail your great idea with another episode topic. So here we go again. We pulled
Yeah.
this one out of an old episode. Now we're creating another one,
Yep.
which is great. It shows how these things are all in relationship with each other. You know, one of the things I recommend within a team environment and culture is a regular routine of their vision, but I also ask them to have a regular routine of their execution. The vision one doesn't need to happen on a regular basis. I mean, some teams are really great at doing it regularly, but it's important to occasionally, revisit the strategy to make sure we're on track. But more often, I like the idea of a weekly routine where we evaluate the process using the good old fashioned keep, start, stop. Well, if we did this with our team, we're now taking your idea and everybody's giving input. Ooh, keep doing that in the subject line. That's really helpful. Hey, we could improve that. Maybe tighten it up. It's too wordy, or start this or stop that. The point is, if you think about the purpose of that process meeting and what you just defined as a hack for your team with the email, bring those into the meeting and suddenly you're coaching your teammates. And I'll bet you it won't take a month before everybody starts figuring out, okay, this works. We can do this. We just saved a lot of back and forth. We just saved a lot of confusion.
Mhm.
Wouldn't everybody like to have a little more time back in their life?
Oh gosh, I know. That would be fantastic. All right, here's another one. So you brought up folders, but another thing that comes up with that is the search. And I don't think people use the search like spot enough. And they think, oh, if it's not in my inbox, I'll never be able to find it again. You can also search to create folders, right? So let's say if you're using subject lines accurately, you might have always put Smith in the subject line. Well, that makes it easy to search later if something comes up, and you can always dump those into a Smith folder. But think about the search when you construct an email because that does help to find stuff down the road. And I think that's some of that stuff that we just don't do enough. If you're also looking at cleaning out your inbox, that tab at the top that's sort, you can say, hey, I'm going to sort all the emails from Mortgage News Daily, or I'm going to search all the emails that I know that I can now
Mm.
delete those because it's been long enough. So it's a good way to get rid of some of those emails too, is just sort them by who was it from? When did I get it? Does it have an attachment? Who sent it and what was their subject line?
I really can't add to that, Catherine. Those are all really good suggestions. So, how about I simply bring up a different one that falls into that same category because you talked about it in the setup. People will sometimes be afraid to move things out of their inbox out of this phantom fear that I won't be able to find it again. You're giving them great search tips, but here's another tip. Imagine that you decided in that earlier process to delete something. Most of us have a trash can in our email inbox,
Mhm.
but your search function even searches the trash can, which means if you have that fear that, oh my gosh, if I delete it, what if I need it later down the road, is potentially a phantom fear. And here's my rule, and consider whether this works for your compliance, whether this fits your company compliance. I keep a year's worth of deleted items in my Outlook, and then every 6 months, delete the prior 6 months. So
Mm.
at the end of the exercise, still have the last 6 months of email in there. I just cleared out the ones from 6 months and a day all the way back to a year. And I do that twice a year. So I have a mid year and an end of year inbox deletion because after 6 months, the likelihood of something I had already put in the trash and didn't come back is pretty low. Um, of course, I reserve the right to pull one out if I need to, but more often than not, I'm just freeing up storage space so that my email server can operate more efficiently. But your search function even works in the deleted box. So it's not just the clutter
Mhm.
folder or the junk folder, it'll look in that folder as well. So don't let the fear of deleting something be a reason that you get anxious about the exercise of cleaning out your inbox. Use Catherine's suggestion about search to even search your trash can.
I'm going to add a note, check with your company that you work with because there are some companies that auto delete the deleted items.
Mm.
And so it may not be the best to save those unless you have full control like Michael does. So that I've known someone that bit because they were using their deleted box as a folder essentially. So you just want to be a little bit careful about that. The other thing is if you're getting 400 to 500 emails a day, that your server's going to fill up really quickly. So you have to,
Yeah.
if you're a coach,
Well,
that's a little
Well,
less
that's a
emails
really good
maybe.
point that you're making because a lot of our high producers that listen to the podcast are high producers for a reason. They've got a lot of partners, they've got a lot of clients, they're signed up for a lot of resources and tools. So you're right, they're going to get a lot of emails. So two things there that you touched on. Check with your company. That's a great suggestion. Glad you called that one out. And then, maybe figure out, maybe it takes one quick check with your IT, how much storage do I have in here and how regularly are you automatically deleting it so that I just know that ahead of time and can build my strategy around it. Two great tips, Catherine. You're
Mhm.
on it today. Let's keep going.
Well, only because I've run into some problems over my email life. So this is what I like, and again, don't use enough, is schedule emails. So
Mm,
let's say you have a thought and you have to get it out of your brain and it's 10 p.m. If you send that email to that client and you're still an email at 10:30 and they respond, now you're in a conversation at 10:30 p.m. So schedule that for the morning. And then our clients don't get as used to, oh, well, she always responds at night. I'm just going to email her at night when I get home because you're training the client that you're working during those hours. So scheduling it for, hey, I know that like this would be a big time Michael hack. I know that Michael checks his email between 10 and 11 every day. I'm going to schedule my email to arrive at 10:05 so that I know he'll respond to me. But that could be that, hey, I know agents are always in a meeting Monday morning. I'm not going to send them an email during that Monday morning time. I'm going to send it on Tuesday at 9 p.m., even though I write it today or whatever that time is for you. So I think that schedule we just don't use enough, but it's a good thing to remind people about.
Yeah, it's not the purpose of why you brought it up, but boy, does that help for some folks on a team because you talked about training a client, but this happens, and I hear about it often in coaching calls where a teammate feels the anxiety that maybe their superior, whether it's a manager or team leader,
Mhm.
has emailed them at 10 o'clock at night, and now it's the the tension of, oh my gosh, they expect me to respond to that. When the truth is, maybe that team leader hadn't really thought that through. That was just when they had an opportunity to send that message. But they created the anxiety in their teammates to feel like, oh my gosh, we've got to be available. We've got to respond. So timing that schedule might also help bring some harmony back to your team, letting them, I don't know, spend time with their family and get a good night's sleep, which, by the way,
Mhm.
helps them come back fresh and ready to serve you and your clients tomorrow. So that's a great suggestion, and it can have that benefit. You're right. It's our responsibility. We tend to create expectations around what we do. You've heard me say back to the Boundaries for Leaders book, 13 years ago, we always get a combination of what we create or we allow.
Mhm.
So if you create and embrace this scheduling part of the email tool, you'll get a different set of results than if you allow email to fly 24 hours a day. So it's a great suggestion to use it. And I hope people consider that there could be some real positives from that. Look, if you want to send an email at 10:30 at night, another easy hack, if you're just not into the scheduling it for a decent hour, maybe consider opening your email with, hey, Catherine, by the way, sending this before I go to bed. Please don't respond to it till tomorrow. I'll see, like let them know. And that's another way to let people off the hook.
Yeah. Yeah. Or just draft it, send it in the morning. It could be the My Best Friend's Wedding problem. That movie. If anyone watches that, you learn all about draft emails getting sent.
If only Jerry Maguire had considered that advice before he wrote his manifesto in the middle of the night, maybe he would have thought differently about it in the morning.
That's right. That's right. Sometimes I have used that as if I have to get something out and maybe I'm upset, I'll draft it and then wait till the next day, read it, adjust it, and then send it. So I give myself some emotional time to digest that email. That's a different episode in itself, is how to deal with emotional moments in the workplace. So that's a good one too. All right. So then we touched on this, but I just want to put a highlighter on this category: one touch email handling. So respond, delegate, archive, snooze, convert it to a task, etc. So what can you do to touch an email and do one of five things? And if you have those laid out, it's a lot easier to do that. Again, email is not my expertise, but these are all, I think, great ideas for people to take and hold on to and sort through their inbox pretty quickly.
Yeah, if you're looking for a way to start that conversation with your team, one of the books I'd recommend that I got referred to by Bill Hart 20 years ago is a book by David Allen called Getting Things Done, GTD. It creates exactly what you're describing, a system to follow. Now, you may love that system or you may modify it and make it work for you. Later Michael Hyatt in Free to Focus shared his system for that, and it's modified and much more streamlined than the one that David Allen wrote. I'm not as concerned with how detailed it is or how streamlined it is. It's that whichever one inspires you as a team leader, whiteboard that out with your team. That's a great exercise to whiteboard out with your team for the if then scenarios of this, so that you can create the strategy for exactly how to one touch. Maybe you'll learn that there are certain emails you can't one touch, but I'll bet you'll find out that a lot of them you can. And once the system is designed to do that, you'll be shocked. And then what's really great, if you want to carry that forward, is now all of our CRMs have workflows built into them. So once you've figured out which ones can, design a workflow so that now you execute the workflow. And not only does the email template get created and you can create the customization in that you want, but the follow-up gets scheduled. I mean, it's
Mhm.
so amazing how you can take these hacks further if you're willing to put the time into them. So I love the motivation of the one touch. That's a great place to start that.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk quickly about rules as well. So, for example, if there's an email that I know I want to read, but I don't need to read urgently, rather than, hey, I'm going to read that later, why doesn't it just go into a folder that is called read later? And I have a ton of those rules set up. If there's an email that only comes to me, but really my team deals with that, I'm going to set up a rule. So I probably have 200 rules in my email. Some of them are just delete that email. Some of them are send it to,
Yeah.
this person, that person on my team, mark it red, and then put it in the archive folder. So there's a lot of ways to even have it not hit your inbox or be dealt with ahead of time, or flag it or mark it a certain color so that I can see it in my inbox, but I know that's not my job. I'm just going to have it in there. So there's different ways to do that that are all rules. So check those out.
Yeah, great call on that. And I want to highlight what you said with an example. So, one of the publications that I try to read on a daily basis is Housing Wire. It's a appropriate place for me to be up to speed with what's going on. But at the time that it lands in my inbox, I've already told you I'm probably in a client session, which means I'm not seeing it when it lands. I'm going to it at a certain time. Well, create the rule that says put that in a folder called Housing Wire. Then every day I know when it's time to read that. Just like if I wanted to check my mail here at the house, I know exactly where my mailbox is. I go grab the mail. I can go grab my Housing Wire update for the day, and I can read that. And Housing Wire is a great, for those of you that watched our episode with Clayton Collins, the president of Housing Wire, you're well aware of what a diverse organization that is. So they sometimes send out other emails that aren't just their daily wire. It's the different things that are maybe peripheral to it, but still tied to it in some way. If all of them are in there, when I go in to read, I'm also reading about, oh yeah, the economic summit's coming up. Oh yeah, there's a news alert for, the Fed policy that's going on and
Mhm.
whatever else is happening. So I really like that idea of rules because rules make that easy. I didn't open my inbox and have to do that manually. It was already in the folder I created for it. It knew exactly where to go.
Mhm.
Your company info is probably the same way. I mean, I'll bet you get a lot of info from your company that I don't want to imply doesn't matter, but it always ends up fitting into the category of stuff I need to plow through. Create a rule for that, create a folder for that, and now just create a time block that says, hey, check my CCM folder, and
Mhm.
away we go.
Absolutely. All right. So, two more quick things to go through. One, I need to address CC. So, if you CC carbon copy people unnecessarily,
Yeah.
it can just like it can balloon emails constantly. So, some of it's having that discussion of, hey, when does it make sense to CC somebody, and when does it not? And then, of course, you want to just be cautious about, hey, if I'm CC'd, does that mean I'm supposed to do something? If I am, tag me in the email. Let's be really clear on what the intent of the email is so we don't just end up in a CC nightmare is maybe the best way to put that.
Well, you're setting up a scenario that fits back into my weekly team productivity meeting where we keep, improve, start, and stop. If you use this topic, just like we discussed earlier, you give some definition for when I send something to you, here's what that means. When I carbon copy you, here's what that means. When I blind carbon copy you, here's what that means. And here are my expectations with those. Once we start having that discussion, again, within a month, we whittle that down to where our likelihood of confusion is maybe it's a single digit for sure, and maybe it's 1% of the time I'm still confused,
Hmm.
versus every time I almost feel a sense of what do you want me to do here? And think of the energy that burns. I mean,
Hmm.
it's just unnecessary confusion. Here's another hack that I'd throw into the same mix. Sometimes you're the recipient of the BCC or the CC. You weren't the one that got to set up that rule. You just got roped in. Um, if someone sends you an email, but they've carbon copied other people, and your first reaction is, I'm not sure why these other people are even on this email, or my response might not be appropriate for these other people. Fun fact, folks, you can just hit reply instead of reply all to the person who sent it and nip that in the bud right away. Hey, Catherine, thanks for
Hmm.
sending this. I'm not really ready to discuss that with the rest of my team, but let's you and I continue the conversation, in a private email. You can stop that. Too many people are passive and they feel like, well, that wasn't my email. Who am I to take other people out of it? Um, you're the recipient. If you're the recipient, you have the right. Now, if you are CC'd or BCC'd, maybe then it's the private email just to clarify that, hey, Catherine, I see you copied me. I'm not sure why I'm in this, or I'm blind copied. was I supposed to be aware of this? You can clarify that without hitting reply all to do that. Not everybody needs to
Hmm.
see your clarification. So that's a hack that I think people forget about, is just because it was a group email doesn't mean you can't do the reply to the sender versus the reply all.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing is just keeping things brief. Email is not meant to be a book. It's not meant to describe the entire situation. Sometimes people won't read emails if they're longer than, let's say, 5 to 10 sentences. So keep them less than, as short as possible. Obviously, you're trying to get a whole bunch of information out to them sometimes. And sometimes, yes, they have to be longer. But keep it in mind if it gets too long, people might just push it to later and never respond. And same thing on the ones coming in. The shorter, the better.
So I'm going to throw a radical one out since you described this as our final productivity hack of email. This is one I'm fond of. Not everybody's going to like this one because I know some people hold their email with a death grip. They love emailing, but I try to tell myself, treat my email like I used to treat a FedEx package. The email part where I'm writing is to describe what's in the package, meaning every time you send
Hmm.
out a FedEx package, it's pretty important to have a cover letter in there or some notification of here's what I'm sending you and why, or what I need back from you, something like that. So, by definition, if I think of my email that way, the implication is if I'm not attaching something, why am I sending an email at all? It forces me to consider I could just pick up the phone instead of sending this because this is just communication. I could walk
Hmm.
down the hallway because they're right here. I don't know why I'm emailing this. I could end up sending a text message because we've agreed ahead of time that's their preferred method of communication anyway. We talked about Teams. I mean, look at the litany of options we have. Why am I choosing email as a communication tool if I'm not sending something as an attachment? It's a challenge I've adopted because it forces me to think about, wow, if I only use email to send attachments, like, hey, I'm attaching the notes from our last coaching session, that has a purpose. So I'm going to send a little cover letter that says, by the way, here's the notes that I took during our session.
Hmm.
Please review the attachment. But if I'm sending a, hey, hope you had a good day. Listen, are we still on for next week? Maybe that doesn't need to be an email. I don't want to cloud your inbox with stuff that maybe could have been better done on a quick phone call with a voice message. I can send a voice to text. I mean, I have so many other options. Consider that. And it's not me telling you that email is dead, but I've yet to meet anyone who says, gosh, I wish I had more email. So I want to do my part to reduce some of the unnecessary email that lands in their inbox.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great tip. Also, as a coach, you've probably talked a lot about email with people because it's definitely a topic, let's call it that. So, any other hacks that you can think of that we haven't covered?
Well, here I'll use one because it goes in line with it. And again, Outlook is such a commonly used platform that I'm going to choose it, although you could be on a Google platform or some other platform to which you're using email. It's often integrated with a calendar. That's often the case. And so consider if the calendar could be a resource instead of just sending an email and then later a calendar as well. Sometimes the calendar invite is by definition the answer to the email, especially when we're talking scheduling a meeting, or especially when we're talking a task that has a deadline at a certain day or a certain time of day. Maybe your team can develop the culture of where the calendar would be a more effective option than the email simply because it's already integrated within the same system that you're using. So that does get discussed from time to time as well, because those things tend to go hand in glove. If I'm talking with a client about email functionality, I'm probably also having some discussion with them about calendar functionality.
Hmm. Yeah. So then it's your suggestion to say, hey, instead of sending an email, put a time for us to meet on the calendar for 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Is have that discussion and figure out as a team, are there options for us to use other tools that don't always default to email? I feel like email has become a default because we were all raised on email. We all live
Hmm.
in a generation where email was waiting for us. It was the first thing we got when we got to our company 30 years ago. We logged on, there was an email and it said, start here. And maybe it was your training. Maybe it was your, how to set up your W-2. Maybe it was, how to get your health insurance benefits started, whatever it was. And we just decided a long time ago that, well, email has to be the communication tool we use for everything. And I want to challenge that because our inboxes are so full of junk and clutter. They're also full of some really important things. And I want to separate those so that we can focus on the really important things and maybe
Mm,
use some of these other tools and resources that our team can learn to adapt to. So, yes, the calendar should be discussed as an option. Maybe your team will decide that's worse. I don't like that option. That you just took something that was bad and you made it worse. But maybe that leads to the discussion of, well, then what would be better? Because the
yeah.
goal is to not drown in email. And if we can find some ways in which to take some of these productivity hacks we've shared today and avoid that drowning feeling, I'm going to call that a win.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that. Well, good. Well, with that, I think we're going to wrap up this episode on email. We'll email it to you. Just kidding. You can find our podcast episodes on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever you get your favorite podcast. Please please share. We really appreciate you listening. And we hope that this helps save some time for you so you have more time to listen. Thanks again.